The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We're going to give everybody a couple more minutes to get situated and log in, and then we will get started. Just give us a couple minutes, thanks. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar about saving time and money with phone interviews. My name is Morgan Gleason and I'm the HR coordinator at Hireology. And I'm also here with Liz Simon, who is our account manager. Hi everybody. We will be talking to you today about why you should be using phone interviews and kind of how to structure them and what you'll be learning from using them and how that's in the end going to save you a lot of time and money during your interview process. So I'll be talking for about the first half hour, just going through some general information about phone interviews, and then Liz will take over and show you exactly how our phone interview guides and scoring works in the Hireology system. So if you are a current Hireology customer or hoping to potentially use the platform, that would be a great opportunity for you to learn all about our phone interview guides. So we will get started with a couple of myths about phone interviews that some of you may have heard or that you think about when you hear the word phone interview. So a lot of people think that the purpose of phone interviews is to just find out if your candidate's compensation and work requirements match up with what you need. But really, it's to save you time from bringing in unqualified people for in-office interviews. So you should think of a phone interview as a real interview and not just a quick 5 to 10 minute conversation about compensation and requirements. A lot of people really do think that phone screens should just be 5 to 15 minutes and just a really brief conversation, but it's really important that you do think of it as a real interview and that you put a lot of thought into what you're asking. Some people also think that phone screens can only be done by someone working in HR, but that's definitely not true. Especially if you have a structured guide, anyone can run through a phone screen as long as they have all the questions that they need in front of them. And another thought that some people have is that you should be testing candidates to see how they react to pressure during your phone screen conversation. And that's definitely not true. You should always be striving to make sure candidates feel comfortable and that they are at ease during your conversations and asking them intelligent questions that really dig into their experience. So getting started, our quick overview, we're going to talk about why companies are using phone interviews, how they should be structured, what you're going to learn from using phone interviews, what you should really be asking people, and then just some quick tips on how to be the best phone interviewer that you can be. So why are companies using phone interviews? Number one, it's saving you a ton of time. If you are offering phone interviews for your initial conversation with people, it can be a lot more flexible. You can be a lot more flexible depending on time when you figure out someone that just can't from that conversation, bring them in at all. They're screening out candidates automatically who just aren't a good fit, even if they may have looked good on paper. You can also clear up a lot of resume questions. Sometimes a little thing, or you may not really know what something means, things with some quick questions, really digging into that. And then you can determine salary expectation, which is really important because if people aren't in line with what you're offering for a role, then it's a waste of your time and the candidate's time if you bring them in, because if they need a certain salary or if they've been living on a certain salary and yours doesn't match that, it might be an immediate no from the candidate. And if you take the time to bring them into the office and talk with them for an hour and a half, and potentially bring in other teammates, that's just a huge waste of your time and potentially your team's time along with the candidate's time. So now we'll talk about how you should structure your phone interviews and what the best process is. So you obviously want to start with an introduction. So introduce yourself, even though you probably already did that in an email. It seems like common sense, but just make sure, hey, I'm Morgan from Hireology, and I'm calling to talk to you about so-and-so position. You want to run them through your interview process and let them know where you're going to go from here, what this interview is about, what you'll be digging into, and just make sure they really understand the point of your phone interview. And then confirm with the candidate that they do understand how long your process is going to take, what you're going to talk about, and everything like that. And then just make sure that they do feel at ease. Like I said earlier, it's really important that your candidate does feel comfortable, and that's the way you're going to get the most honesty out of people and get the best responses and definitely learn the most and really get the most out of your interview guide. So after the introduction, the first thing you really want to talk about is the career plans and goals. So begin by discussing their future career plans. Break down the candidate's plans by years. So starting out with the furthest down the line, ask them what they want to do and where they see themselves in 20 years. If they say they want to be a manager, if they want to own their own company, that's great. It shows a lot of initiative there. Talking about where they see themselves in 5 and 1 years is really important because that's hopefully time where they would still be with your company. So you would like to hear them say, in a year, I see myself really excelling in this role and being on the road to being promoted or being a manager. You want to hear people say that they're hoping to move forward in your company and really make an impact with you. If they don't see themselves with your company in a year, then that's probably not the best sign. So that's a great way to see immediately if you guys are lined up as far as time goes. And then also just making sure that their future career plans line up with your industry. If they, for example, if you work in finance and in 20 years they see themselves running a company that has nothing to do with finance, then maybe finance isn't really their passion and they're just doing this for a job. So that's a great way to learn to see whether or not they see this as an actual career or just a short-term job option. And I know making that sometimes get you into some legal issues if you ask whether or not they want a family or anything like that, but it's just not necessarily the most important. After that, you want to get into what they feel like they're best at and what they don't like doing. So starting with what they're best at, get a feeling that would be involved in this job, and if it's something that's a big part of the job. If they feel like they're best at doing being detail-oriented, then doing something detail-oriented is definitely really important. If they say that they're really, really good at managing people and motivating people, but this position doesn't involve that, then it might be something that they wouldn't exactly be happy with. you want to focus on what they're best at and what they have very rehearsed answers for their weaknesses. And you don't always get the most reliable information. If you ask about what they don't enjoy doing, typically you'll kind of get at their weaknesses without specifically asking for it, and people are typically a little more honest. So if you ask them what they don't like doing and they say, I hate doing paperwork, and this role has a lot of paperwork involved, then it's probably not the right role for them because they'll put it off or they'll procrastinate, or they might not put the effort required into that paperwork, and then you'll have to find another person down the line when they don't work out. So you'll learn more by phrasing the questions this way because people will be more honest and they won't necessarily respond with rehearsed answers such as, my weakness is that I procrastinate, but I've learned not to procrastinate. I mean, people definitely rehearse those things. So if you ask them in a different way, they're less likely to have that rehearsed answer prepared for you. After that, you want to dig a little bit more into their job history. So how you want to do it is look at the candidate's resume that they've provided you with and go through their jobs in reverse chronological order. So you'll start with the job that is the first job, the oldest job on their resume. So typically, depending on the candidate's experience, I like to focus on the positions that are really relevant. So if you have someone who has a job that they worked 20 years ago in retail and it's not relevant to the position that you're hiring for, then it's probably not that important. So focus on their jobs in reverse chronological order, but also focus on what's relevant and what's important to you, because it's probably not all that relevant as to what their assistant manager at Walmart thought of them 22 years ago. After that, you want to focus on their performance rather than specific responsibilities. So you can kind of see a general outline of their specific responsibilities on their resume. So you have a general idea of kind of what they're looking for, and if there's anything that's confusing, you can always clear that up. But in this part, you want to focus on who their supervisor was and how the candidate thinks that supervisor would rate their performance. So ask for their supervisor's name and make sure you ask about spelling, just because it'll kind of hint to the candidate that you're really interested in knowing who this person is and you might follow up with them in a reference check. So people are way more likely to be honest if they think that whatever they say will be either confirmed or not confirmed by their previous supervisor. So ask them how they think their supervisor would rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, and then ask why they think that. So someone may say, my supervisor would rate me a 7, but it's because I was only there for a short amount of time and I wasn't able to learn everything I needed to learn. Or they could say, my supervisor would give me a 10 because I was super awesome, but they may not ever give you anything specific that they could improve upon. So sometimes that's not the best sign because there's always room for improvement, even if you're really confident in your performance. And then from that point, you'll just repeat those same questions, asking about the supervisor and asking about their performance for other positions. After you go through their job history, then you want to move into talking about the position that you're hiring for. So obviously, they've most likely looked through the job description and looked through all the responsibilities, but just run through them again, look over your job analyses or your job posting, and just talk about the responsibilities and the different things that they would be in charge of in this role. And then make sure you talk about how that position fits within the company. A lot of people are curious about who they'll be working with, what team they're on. Sometimes it's not really obvious, especially when it comes to the varying company sizes that are out there. So just letting them know kind of how big the company is, what kind of team they'll be working with is really important because it helps people understand if it's something that they're looking for, if they're going to be reporting to someone, if they have people reporting to them. It's just really important that they know that. And then another important part is to ask if the candidate feels like they're a good fit for the role. Typically, people will say yes to this question unless they really don't want the job. But the best candidates will tell you exactly why they're a good fit, and they'll have a lot of great things to pull out of the conversation that you've already had and say why they would excel at those responsibilities. And then another important thing that people don't always think about asking for is cause for concern. So if they've heard anything in the conversation, or if they've found an article online that may say something negative about the company, or if they're concerned about moving from a small company to large corporate culture, just ask them about what concerns they may have and either helping to clarify those things, or just knowing that maybe they're not the best candidate because they're concerned about something that is just a part of your company and that definitely isn't going to change. So it's important to know what they're concerned about and where they may be hesitating about your role, because that'll give you a good idea of whether or not you want to move forward with them. And then after that, you'll want to follow up with some wrap-up responses and also letting them ask some questions. So to wrap up, you want to figure out what the candidate's timeline is for making a decision on their job opportunity, whether they need a job by a certain date or they're leaving the country for so they plan accordingly. You also, along with that, if they have any offers or interviewing with other companies who really like a candidate and you feel like they're a good fit, but you also find out that they're in the last stages with coming in for an in-office interview or meeting with whatever team members they need to meet with, so that you can hopefully have an offer on the table with them before the other company does, or at least within a reasonable timeline, so that they're not required to reject another opportunity or accept another opportunity before they're able to get your offer. Another thing you want to definitely talk about is what is most important to that candidate in their job. If you are not able to necessarily offer the things that are most important to someone, then it's probably not a good fit down the road. It may be a great experience fit, but if you don't necessarily have the culture that they're looking for, or you don't necessarily have the benefits offered that they need for whatever reason, then you want to know that up front so you're not wasting time and money interviewing and potentially hiring this person, or even rejecting other good candidates in order to get this person on your team. And then you want to ask if there's anything relevant to our conversation that we haven't yet discussed. This is really important because it allows them to specifically say, these are these things that we didn't talk about, and I know that I bring this, this, and this to the table. It's an opportunity really for the candidate to kind of sell themselves and tell you why they're great at this role and why they would be an awesome fit for your company. It's another space for them to also bring up any experiences that you may not have touched on, or any certifications or degrees or qualifications that they may have that they didn't have listed for some reason or that you didn't talk about. And then obviously to wrap up the interview, you want to let them ask questions. So any questions they may have about things that you've talked about, or things, again, that they may have read online by doing some research, you want to give them the opportunity to ask those questions and get some of their questions answered as well. It's important kind of to have the interview go both ways at this point and let them open up and ask questions that they've been wondering about to make sure that they're also getting what they need to know to make a decision on whether or not they want to move forward as well. So now that we've gone through the structure of an interview, let's talk about why you're doing this and what you're learning. So we talked a little bit about the importance of companies using phone interviews and talked a little bit about what you should learn from them. But really, you are going to know after this interview if a candidate is looking for a job like the one that you're offering. You'll know if they have the same goals in mind, if they're looking for a long-term career in this field, or they're just looking for a temporary job. You'll know really if you are a good fit for them and are a good fit for you. If your job is a good fit for the candidate's experience, is something else that you'll also be learning. You will know a ton about what they've done in the past and if this role is really lined up well with their experience. You'll also have a general idea of whether or not they're a good culture fit. This is something that is hard to tell over the phone, but you'll know whether or not they have the right personality. If you have a company that's a little more quirky or a little more outgoing and someone's very reserved and shy on the phone, they may not be the best fit. You don't immediately want to write them off for that, but it's something to keep in mind if you do bring them in for an in-person interview, to just be able to be prepared for that and potentially try to break them out of their shell and see if there is a potential culture fit there. And then something else that you definitely learn from a phone screen is whether or not the candidate is truly interested in your company and the role that you're offering. If a candidate has a ton of questions at the end, and if they have clearly done some research about your company, that's a great sign that they're really interested in your company and the position that they're offering. If a candidate has taken the time to research you or research your company and the history and has questions about that, then they definitely put the time in to learn about your company before moving forward with the interview, and that if they're willing to put in that time before speaking with you, then they're definitely willing to put in the time to make sure that they're a great candidate. So a lot of companies do phone interviews, and what we also want experience, and they're basically review their resume. You want to ask things that help you get, and you want to know about the hard qualifications for the job. You want to know that they have everything that is required. Sometimes that's hard to tell on a resume, and you get a little more information in the phone interview. So you definitely don't want to bring someone in if they don't qualify, if they don't have the degree, or if they don't have the experience that you require. Then you can just cut the interview and know that they're just not the right candidate at this time. And then just to kind of talk about a few questions that I really like when it comes to phone interviews, and I know Liz will talk about her favorites as well. I really like the what are you best at and what do you not enjoy questions, because I really feel like the candidate opens up because they don't feel like they're asking specifically about their strengths and weaknesses. If you ask someone what they're best at, it's usually going to be one of their strengths, but you also know that it's something that they enjoy doing, it's that they would want to do in a job. And then when you ask them what they don't enjoy, typically it's something they either have a weakness in or they just don't really want to have to do a lot of the time in their job. I know earlier I had brought up paperwork, and that's pretty much going to be present in almost any job. There's always going to be some kind of administrative work going on. So if someone says that that's their weakness, that doesn't mean that they never want to do it or they're always going to ignore it, but it might not be something that they want to do 80% of their day. And you know that they will not necessarily want and that they're never going to do it. So I think it's a good thing to know what someone would enjoy doing most of the time and what they don't necessarily want to be a big part of their job without specifically asking for strengths and weaknesses. And then moving into some tips for being the best phone interviewer, and these are definitely very important. So number one, you want to be on time. You want to respect the time of the interviewee. Your candidates are setting aside time to speak with you, and obviously they want a job and they should be excited to speak with you and set aside that time, but you also need to respect that they have lives outside of the interviewing process. So just make sure you're on time with your call. If you're going to be a little bit late, shoot them an email and let them know that, or reschedule with them. Another thing is to use an interview guide and make sure that you're staying on track and following that. It's very important to use a guide because you want to make sure that you're staying consistent and focusing on the same things with each and every candidate. In order to make sure that you're all on the same page and that each candidate is giving you the same information, you need to make sure you're staying on track and following that interview guide. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that you also should be prepared to answer questions from the candidate. If it's something that you may not necessarily know, definitely feel free to tell the candidate that it's not your area of expertise, and you'll definitely reach out to them with the answer to that question after the interview is over. But just be prepared to either have that response ready or have some answers prepared. Kind of goes along with staying on track is keeping the conversation to your time limit. So typically, for a phone interview, it depends on the company. Obviously, you can customize to what you need, but typically phone interviews will take between up to 45, just depending on how talkative your candidate may be. But just make sure that you tell the candidate, give them a range of time. If you want to say, this conversation, try your best to stay within that time limit. If a candidate starts rambling about something, do your best to kind of cut them off and move on to the next question, and don't ask additional questions that aren't on your interview guide. Another thing to be at ease is interested and engaged in the conversation. So you want to make sure that they feel at ease and you reassure them that you are actively listening to them and paying attention to everything that they're saying. People can definitely tell when you're trying to multitask or when you're doing something else and not really paying attention to them. So just make sure that you're actively listening, reassure them about their answers, kind of have a react that, pay attention and be as active as possible. And then something else that's very important is making sure the guide and everything, you want to make sure that you have a scoring system that will be exactly the same for each candidate. So that's something that if you do use Hireology, we offer in our phone interview guides. You can also case conversation, but if you're doing 10 phone screens for one position, system and show you the interview guides. Before we have that, let us know if you have any questions. You can type them into the webinar screen. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions come in, and one that I think is a really great question is that sometimes if you're talking to, say, a retired person who's seeking part-time retail work, it might not be logical to ask them where they see themselves in 20 years, and I completely agree with you. So the great thing about Hireology and just using interview guides in general is that you can really customize them to the job at hand. So if you know that all you're hiring for is a part-time retail position, you may not need to know where they see themselves in 20 years. So you can just talk about where they see themselves in a year or where they see success in this role. And just really focus on the role at hand instead of focusing on 20 years, because definitely a retired person 20 years down the line where they see themselves at that store. So I completely agree with you. Another question was whether or not we can have a list of the slides, and we will be sending that out to everyone after this conversation, so you'll have that saved and you can reference back to it at any is point, and she's going to run through our Hireology. So thanks.
Thanks so much for the lovely intro, Morgan. And as Morgan had explained, the great thing, all of the best practices that Morgan just outlined and discussed, it's really great to keep all those wonderful pointers in mind. But the best part about Hireology is that we take all those best practices and we do the hard work for you. log into your account and use the phone screen. You can use those, and they, Morgan just discussed. So when you log into your Hireology account, you will then log in, and you'll see that you are going to be on the page where all of your jobs are displayed. So click on the name of the job that you are going to be conducting your phone interviews. And what you'll see is that candidate repository. As many of you who are very familiar with the system know, there are 3 different tabs that you'll be working out of. There's the Identify tab, the Interview tab, and the Verify tab. And the Interview tab is where you're really going to be working to conduct your interviews. What you'll see on this screen is the 3 different interview guides that we provide for you with your Hireology subscription, and they're listed and presented in the order that they are intended to be used. So the first, all the way to the left-hand side under the phone column, is exactly that. It's the phone screen that's designed to be a tool for you to conduct the phone interview. The next 2 interviews, the achievements and the elements, are both in-person interviews. We're not going to discuss those today, but they are presented in the order that they're intended to be used. So the achievements would be the first of 2 in-person discussions, and the elements interview would be the 3rd and final interview, but the 2nd in-person discussion. So in order to initiate a phone screen, what you would do is locate the name of the candidate who you're interested in having this conversation with, and you'll locate the guide underneath the correct column. So for this person, we're going to interview the Muffin Man. We'll click on this phone icon. When we do that, and I'm going to move my panel so we can see this, this PDF document will populate. And what it will do is it will auto-pull all the candidate's information so that you don't have to remember who you're speaking with. You'll then see that we give you a fully scripted interview guide. So it literally is down to the candidate's name and your name. It auto-pulls all of that information automatically. You'll see that as you scroll down, we will give you the questions to ask. And then these big boxes that you see underneath each question are actually text boxes for you to take notes and remind yourself about how the candidate answered your question. If there was anything really poignant that they mentioned, something that you definitely want to get back to or follow up on, definitely make sure to jot that down in these text boxes. I do want to point out, it's really important as a friendly reminder that this script is a totally internal document for you and your hiring team to review. It's not for the candidate to see, and it's not to be shared with them at all. So that's my little side note. But as mentioned, we've got text boxes underneath each question, and these are really important questions, again, that are based very specifically on all the best practices and the principles that Morgan had discussed previously. I do want to draw your attention specifically to question number 14. This is certainly my favorite question, and it's a really important question specifically. And it says, what would you say is the biggest misperception that people have of you? As I mentioned, it's really important, and in personal experience interviewing here at Hireology, we've received some interesting answers, and I'm sure you will too. But essentially, the answer to this question can provoke some thoughtful pauses in your candidate as they consider some negative opinions of others and what they think those negative opinions might be, and whether they think that those views are accurate. More often than not, this question taps into weaknesses that the candidates aren't even explicitly aware of, as well as those they know exist but don't intend to address when they're selling themselves to you and trying to put their best foot forward. Top candidates have a high level of self-awareness, and they will know what the biggest misperception is about them. They understand that that perception is a reality in many cases, and they already have a plan in place to address it. So what will wind up happening if you are talking to a candidate who is incredibly self-aware, they will typically tell you exactly what they're really like. Typically, it's an unflattering characteristic about them, what they're really like outside of an interview setting. The reason why they wind up telling you that facet about their behavior or their personality is because we all make a perception based on what we see or what we observe repeatedly with a certain person. We all act out of our own experiences. And so it's very clear that other versions of us because we act a certain way repeatedly. So I definitely invite you to let me know about your most fun answers to that question because it's my favorite specifically. This discussion typically will take about 30 to 45 minutes. I'd say 45 if you really have a candidate who's especially talkative. This interview guide seems like it's going to take longer. It looks somewhat monstrous, and that's only because these text boxes take up a lot of space on the page. The best part about our interview guides is that we take all of the guesswork out of your discussion from this process. What you're going to wind up doing is after you have this conversation with the candidate, so after you hang up the phone, you'll see that in green text there's a section that says phone screen scorecard. And this is where you will literally have a self-reflective moment after the candidate is off the phone, and you'll have to determine, based on the conversation you had, you'll have to determine an answer for each of these different competencies. Our system understands which of these competencies are most important for the job that you're hiring for. So it's really important that you're honest with yourself and that you're honest with the system, because the system understands which of those competencies are most important and weights those competencies accordingly. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and fill these in. Oops, and I messed that up a little bit. For the sake of time, I'm just going to fill in these bubbles quickly, but you, of course, would do this very thoughtfully based on your conversations with your candidate. And when you're finished putting in an answer to each competency, you'll see that at the bottom of the screen there's this big orange button that says Calculate and Save Score. It's really important that we use the scoring mechanism in our interviews because typically we only guess correctly about a candidate's success or guess correctly about a good candidate 50% of the time when we're guessing based on gut reactions or impressions. And based on so many important best practices that Morgan discussed, it's also really important that we utilize this scoring mechanism because a completely objective scoring tool is going to help you make a decision on a candidate based on quantifiable data, not a gut feeling, not a thought. So what we'll do is we'll press Calculate and Save Score, and now you'll see in the score box at the bottom right, this candidate scored a 93%. And you'll see in green text, the interview says low risk, which means that the candidate is low risk for being a bad candidate. They are likely to do well, so we would recommend that you move forward in the next phase of the interview process. After you've scored the interview, you can go ahead and you can click Done in the upper right-hand corner. And now what you'll see is next to the same row is the Muffin Man's name, to the right of his name in the phone screen column. The scoring has the interview been conducted. It's also been scored. And you'll see that you can keep track of where you're at in the interview processes throughout the entire timeline with this page. So it's a really nice tool to keep you organized and to help you make the best hiring decisions. So at that, that's essentially how you go about conducting the phone screen interview and scoring it. So at this point, we'd really like to turn the discussion over to you, our audience, and we hope that you've got some great questions, and we'd love to hear what you're interested to know. Hello again. Thank you so much for those of you who have written in with some great questions. The first that I'm going to answer is, how do you verify the information in the phone screen is accurate? And so what I'm interpreting the question to mean is, how do we verify that the information provided by the candidate is accurate? The best way to do that is to ask follow-up questions with your candidate. Certainly make sure that when you're asking for certain things, for example, like a candidate's previous supervisor or their previous manager, spelling out their first name or last name and really confirming that that information is correct signals to the candidate, number one, that you actually care about that information, but number two, that you're serious about following up with that candidate and you're going to be verifying the other information that they've provided. So you would hope that if you received a dishonest answer originally, that that would be a really nice opportunity for the candidate to make sure and adjust their response. The next question is, I like these phone interviews, but I already had my script that I use. How can I incorporate that? That's a really great question, and it's an important one because we get that a lot. And in Hireology, in addition to the phone screen that we provide for you, you are able to fully customize the phone screen guide. So it's a great way to be able to take some of what we do and whatever you know works in your own practice and merge those together. For anyone who is a franchise owner who's participating in the call, I do just want to first clarify that the ability to customize the interviews is there for you. Unfortunately, it's not quite as accessible. However, we are going to be adding a feature that our engineers are working on very hard right now that will allow you to actually be able to customize your own phone screens and other interview guides as well. And that should be ready by Q1. So just so you know that if what I'm about to show you doesn't look familiar, I'm happy to help you with that. So please feel free to give me a call. But what you'll wind up doing is clicking on this green settings button in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see that a drop-down menu appears. Make sure to click Settings, and you will be directed to a page with several different tabs. And it looks like this. I'm going to move my panel over here again with several different tabs. It's really important to understand the way that the customization process works is that every interview in your system has to correspond to a hiring process, and a hiring process has to correspond to a job profile. So I certainly don't intend to overwhelm anyone. I just want to make sure that you know that this functionality exists, and we also have documentation for additional reference for your review that I'm happy to provide. What you'll do is you'll click on the Interviews tab, and here what you'll do is you'll see all the different interviews for all of your different jobs. So for something like the telephone screen, this basic telephone screen is the guide available to you if you do nothing. And the first thing I always recommend is that you change the name of the document because it will default to saying copy of telephone screen. So we're just going to call this custom telephone screen. And here what you'll see is that you'll be able to edit questions, you will be able to remove questions, and you can actually change the verbiage of specific questions. You can also add your own questions. So again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you what that looks like if we decided to add another question. Click that button, and you'll see there's a big box that appears for us to add that question. And I'm just going to say, this is the test question, so that you'll see how this all comes together. We'll click OK, which adds the question to our guide, and now we scroll to the bottom and we click Save. Now that we've created a custom phone screen, we want to make sure that that phone screen is now associated with a special hiring process. So we now click on the Hiring Process tab. What you're going to want to do is, again, the basic standard hiring process is what you have available to you if you do nothing. But if you want to create custom guides, you have to first create a new hiring process. So we're going to call this Custom Hiring Process. And in the hiring process, this is where you determine the full range of steps that your candidate will go through in order to successfully apply for your job. So you want to make sure to check the boxes for the areas that you want to be included in the hiring process. So we definitely want to include the candidate application, make sure the basic application form is checked. You want to do the smart rank. You want to make sure that each candidate receives a smart rank survey. And then telephone screen. Select that and you'll see that you've got two options. Either we have the basic telephone screen, or you'll now see that custom telephone screen that we just modified together is available. Make sure to check that. You'll then go through and complete the other steps that you want included, and then you want to make sure to say save. Once you've created that hiring process, you then want to go back to the job that you've created that hiring process for. So for us, it was the account executive. We're going to click Edit Job, and we're going to make sure that that new custom hiring process, these are all the specifications associated with your job. Instead of hiring process, you want to make sure now that the hiring process associated with this position is the custom hiring process. We can then click Continue. And then you'll be taken to the screen where your job description is listed. We'll click Update. And now what you'll see is, if I were to click on the Muffin Man phone screen, and we scroll down, you will now see that custom question that we added, this is the test question, is displayed. And again, if you have any further questions about customizing any of the guides, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email.
So we had a question about a good way to kind of quickly but gracefully end an interview once you're pretty confident that it's just not a good fit. So I would say 90% of the phone screens at Hireology, so I run into this pretty frequently. There are definitely a lot of times where someone says something and you just know that it's not a good fit, whether it's that they're just not a good culture fit, they're looking for something that's either below or above the level you're offering. I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can learn this. So what I typically do, I don't just end it. I don't just say, well, that's all I need, bye. I typically kind of do a brief wrap-up and kind of act like that was always supposed to be the end of the interview. So I'll just ask, do you have any other questions? I'll let you know within, we try to do 24 hours. So I'll say, do you have any other questions? Answer their questions, then say, great, I really appreciate your time, and I will let you know whether or not we want to move forward in 24 hours, and then I will end the call. So I've had phone screens that were 15 minutes long, but I don't think the candidate necessarily knew that I was cutting it off because they were just not a good fit. If you kind of slowly end the conversation by still letting them ask some questions and just wrapping it up without just saying, well, okay, I'm going to go bye. So make sure that you're just kind of slowly ending the conversation, but you can definitely skip questions or skip sections if you just know that it's not a good fit. There's no point in wasting your time asking a bunch of questions if you knew in the first 5 minutes that it's just not going to work out.
Okay, the last question that we are going to take is related to the question about the biggest misconception that others have of you. And this participant asks, on the misconception question, what would be an example of a good answer on it? One person told me that people might think that she was ditzy. Most people tell me things like, good or a great answer for this question is someone who's giving you an answer that shows that they're very self-aware. For example, someone who might say, other people think that I'm ditzy, they might realize for whatever a ditzy persona is, they might realize whether it's They don't necessarily provide the most intelligent answers to questions. Whatever it is, it's showing how aware a candidate is about themselves. Most are very honest and can admit about it and why that might be a misperception that others have about them. In terms of it's a cop-out answer. It seems like the candidate is trying to give you